Okay, and we are live. So, what was my reasons for telling you guys this? Now, the Russians are busy in Ukraine right now. They have plans to take over the entire of the eastern Ukraine. I don't really know what they want to do. They're probably going to take the entire Ukraine, which is like super crazy, but they're going to take the entire territory of the Ukraine. Now, once they're done with the Ukraine, what do you guys think they're going to do next? Who's the next target? The next target is logically the Baltic states. I think Russia's going to attack the Baltic states. Now, why do I think they're going to attack the Baltic states? Because it's very strategic. If they take these three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they in effect control the entire Baltic Sea, and logistically it would be a very, very big help because they will be able to link the ports with St. Petersburg, Tallinn, Riga, and then there's Klaipėda here. It's not really a major port, but it's still a pretty big port. And Riga and Tallinn, those are very strategic ports. Now, what would be his reasons for doing so? Well, Putin says that there's a large presence of NATO troops here, and he wants those Baltic states to be neutral and for them not to take sides in a conflict in Europe, but that's not going to happen. They've already joined NATO, and if Putin were to attack NATO, because Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania consists of NATO, what would be the consequence of that would be World War III, because what would happen? Let's break it. So NATO is made up of a lot of different countries: Netherlands, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland. Switzerland's not part of NATO. Italy is, and then a whole host of these Balkan states are part of NATO. It would be kind of hard to believe, though, that the West would go to war over the Baltic states. In case you guys don't know, in World War II, the Germans had somewhat of this area. Kaliningrad, Gdansk. Gdynia was Polish, but Gdansk was what was it? It was called Danzig before. It was formerly known as Danzig. And the Germans wanted a Polish corridor. They wanted a Polish corridor here, like a motorway, to link towards the port city of Danzig. That was the Germans' demands, because they felt that Danzig was part of the old German Empire, and they felt that Versailles was a very unfair treaty, and they were basically fleeced out of territory. So the Germans went to war over Danzig, which they didn't really go to war over Danzig. They were going to go to war anyways. It didn't matter if the Polish gave them Danzig anyways. They would have went to war regardless because they wanted more territory and they wanted to take over the entire of Europe. So what is my point in this? My point is that the Western Allies did nothing to help Poland. They declared war on Germany, but they didn't attack in 1939 or 1940. They let Poland fall. The only thing they did was join the war. So I think this could be a contrast of that similar situation. I think NATO will be forced to react, but they don't have enough time to supply. Kaliningrad would be able to run interference with supply. Kaliningrad would be a very, very important enclave for the Russians if there was supposed to be a war, because the Russians can also use Belarus to attack the Baltic states. They can mass troops on the border here in the Baltics, in Belarus, and take Lithuania. Once they take Lithuania, they've already linked up with Kaliningrad. I think Lithuania is key here. Then they can just roll up the entire front by attacking through Russian territory and Belarus territory. So Latvia and Estonia are very isolated here. They're very isolated because if one of these Baltic states crumbles, the rest is like a house of cards. They're gonna fall because they're stronger together than apart. If Latvia was not part of NATO, then Putin could just take Estonia with impunity. No one would be able to stop him. But the fact that all three countries are linked territorially and they can move troops freely between these borders, and NATO can resupply from Poland, they're going to resupply from Poland. That's obvious. Their main forces are going to be hitting through this artery, Suwalki and Gagauzzo, to support the Baltic states. But, man, Kaliningrad can run interference in those supplies. If they capture Lithuania, if the Soviets capture Lithuania first, supply to these two territories would have to be done by sea. And the fact that the Russians have Kaliningrad and they have St. Petersburg, that means they can dominate the entire Baltic Sea after these two countries fall, because they have the new ports. Consequently, the plan for the NATO would be to take Kaliningrad as soon as possible, because it's a very strategically important port. Extremely strategically important. Because the Russians can run interference with supply. If the Polish try to, which they would resupply Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia through this area. That's the only place. Or they would have to do it by sea. They don't have any other land routes. The only land route is through Lithuania. So Putin takes Lithuania, I think it's game over. Almost. Not completely, but almost. It's a big shock. Because once Lithuania goes, Latvia goes, then Estonia goes. It's like a house of cards. Their survival is tied to the next person next to them. So their survival is linked. These Baltic states, they need to stay stronger together than ever. Yes, consequently, they would have to take Kaliningrad, which with Lithuania and Poland. But once they attack, the Russians would attack through Belarus and take Lithuania. Once Lithuania is over, then Poland's not going to attack here because they're stronger now. And once they take Ukraine, and they have Belarus already, and they take Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, I don't think they're going to attack Poland in any way. They're never going to attack Poland. They won't. They won't attack Poland. They don't have any need to. I think Putin's going to stop with the Baltic states, really. What reason would he have to attack Poland? I mean, in war, yeah, if they attack him, but they won't. They're not going to take Poland. At most, they'll take the Baltic states, which means they're going to be very powerful. They're going to control the entire Baltic Sea and the trade. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on Poland, which means Poland's going to bend to the demands of Russia. But how is Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and France, and UK and US going to respond? Probably going to send a large force to garrison Poland and to help them out. Probably beef up the naval presence in the Baltic Sea. But once the Russians take Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, their presence in the Baltic Sea is much more powerful because they have a lot more ports. Yes, the Germans have ports also here. But come on, they're going to dominate the Baltic Sea. But man, if he takes these three states, what's going to happen? NATO's going to declare war? I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think NATO's willing to die over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Just like the Allies were not willing to die for Danzig, Gdansk in World War II. They only attacked in 1944. Some would say the French didn't have the capabilities to attack the Germans at that time because they were still beefing up their army. They were still feeling the effects of World War I, which are all valid arguments, but still, you didn't attack. You told them you were going to attack, but you didn't. They only had a little minor SAR offensive here, but they did nothing. They pulled back as soon as the Germans counterattacked. So they basically did nothing. And there was also another reason why they didn't help Poland was probably because Poland helped the Nazis attack Czechoslovakia in World War II. They took some of the Polish territory. Czechoslovakian territory. So historically, Poland took some of Czechoslovakia's territory and they were in league with the Germans. So there's a lot of things that we don't really know about this conflict. More so, why is Russia attacking Ukraine? Probably because they're, threatening to join NATO and they're threatening to put ballistic missiles in the country, which would mean that Russia's safety is kind of at risk, which I don't think it is. But how do you think the United States would react if Russia put fucking ballistic missiles in Mexico? They would react very violently, and rightfully so. But when Russia does it, it's kind of like looked at as some type of crazy attack, which is interesting. Very interesting. But that's my little thoughts. I think if they take Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, Russians are very, very going to be at the upper end of the spectrum. But how are they going to maintain these countries and occupy them? Do they have enough force to do that? And also, if you think about the oil and gas supplies that Russia supplies to Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Poland, well, Poland's not really. Well, how much of Poland's energy comes from Russia? 56% of the country's gas consumption. Rest is covered by domestic production, EU imports, and LNG imports. Less than 4% of total UK supply. In 2021, the European Union imported 155 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia, accounting for around 45% of EU gas imports and close to 40% of its total gas consumption. So there's another layer to this conflict. If Russia cuts off the gas imports to the European Union, that will be devastating because they already account for around 45% of supply. What happens when you take away the 45%? You're only left with 55%, which means you'll have to find a way to replace the 45% that you lost, which is going to cause an economic crisis for a period of time until you can find a necessary alternative source of energy, which is going to take some time. Now, would you import them from a different country? That's going to take a long time because you have to cross the Pacific Ocean. Which countries are they going to get energy from? Are they going to turn to nuclear? Nuclear is not really going to work because a lot of people are very hesitant of nuclear. Nuclear is not really something that we're going to consider realistically. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider here. Does Poland get energy from Russia? Does Poland get energy? Of course it does. Of course it does. For Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, and Finland, more than 75% of the imports of petroleum oils originate in Russia. How much of Baltic states' energy comes from Russia? At a time with LNG terminal, Lithuania remains dependent on fossil fuels. This is why 80% of Lithuania's gas imports and a big share, 70% of electricity imports, are from Russia. While the Baltic states may be at least partially independent of Russia for oil through their ability to import trade through terminals on the Baltic Sea, they are almost completely dependent on Russia for natural gas 2012. But let's look at the 2022 consensus. %. That's crazy. Wow. Southern Europe can receive Azeri gas via the trans-Adriatic pipeline to Italy and the trans-Anatolian natural gas pipeline through Turkey. European Union Energy were holding talks on Monday to prepare for any supply shock and work on steps to boost stocks. Several nations could seek to fill any gap in energy supplies by turning to electricity imports via internet connectors. But this is like something that is going to be a very big problem. Because all of this is going to take time. This is going to be really bad for everybody. The Russia's invasion of Ukraine on Thursday gave rise to worries that Russian gas supplies to Europe could be cut. Poland and Lithuania have been discussing early to start the project. Now let's see. How much is going to be shipped? 2.4 billion. Financed by the European Union to help Poland and the Baltic states boost supply security. Okay, but which country is going to take over the supply? Where is it going to come from? From Lithuania to Poland. But which country is going to be the principal supplier of the energy? They don't tell us this. Gas system. Baltic officials said that Inkukaln's gas storage in Latvia and the LNG import facility in Lithuania give reasonable security against gas supply disruptions from Russia. Okay. Is it enough to work? Is it enough? Is it enough gas? I suspect it's not.